In a conference address from 1973, then Elder Thomas S. Monson said this: "Who can probe a mother's love? Who can comprehend in its entirety the lofty role of a mother? With perfect trust in God, she walks, her hand in his, into the valley of the shadow of death, that you and I might come forth unto life. The noblest thoughts my soul can claim, the holiest words my tongue can frame, unworthy are to frame the name more sacred than all other. An infant when her love first came, a man, I find it just the same. Reverently, I breathe her name, the blessed name of mother." That's a poem by George Griffin Fetter, and that was quoted by Elder Monson right before he said, "In this spirit, let us consider mother." Four mothers come to mind. First, mother forgotten. Second, mother remembered. Third, mother blessed. And finally, mother loved. If you have never heard this talk, I encourage you all to click on the link in my show notes and listen to this message. It is beautiful and it will touch your heart in a profound way. Today, I want to focus on the mother remembered and the mother blessed. So grab a snack and make yourself comfortable, and let's get edified. Welcome to the Let's Get Edified podcast. I'm your host, Melinda Morgan. Edified is a podcast for busy women who are looking for ways to draw closer to the Spirit and deepen their connection to Christ. In a word, this podcast is about connection, our connection with each other, and our connection with God. Thank you so much for joining me today for this special Mother's Day edition of the podcast. Recently, I've been thinking about all the ways that my mom demonstrated and taught me about God's love. She was not a spiritual person, yet she believed in God. She never uttered an oral prayer, yet she prayed constantly over her children. Her house adorned no photos of Christ or religious symbols, yet she had unwavering faith in God's plan and in God's timing. The unconditional love she consistently demonstrated for me gave me hope in the possibility that maybe even God could love me unconditionally too. It wasn't until I became a mother myself that I began to understand the depth and power of my mother's love for me. So please join me for the next few minutes as I pay tribute to my mom and the inspirational story of divine design that made us a forever family. Bobby Jane Westbrook was born on June 30th, 1924. She grew up in a modest home in Cato County, Oklahoma, and was the fourth of six children born to Andrew and Grace Westbrook. Early census reports identify her as Roberta, but she went by Bobby. She loved wooded streams, tree squirrels, and riding cabs bareback. Around the age of 15, my mom and dad saw each other for the first time. They were walking in opposite directions along a bridge over the Washita River. My dad watched my mom walk past, then turned to his friends and said, "I'm going to marry that girl." They officially met a couple weeks later at a party hosted by a mutual friend. My parents eloped in 1940. My mom was 16 and my dad was 20. My mom lied about her age in order for them to obtain their marriage license. Nice one, Mom, right? 3 years later, they received the joyful news that they were expecting their first baby. Shortly before the baby's due date, my mom's wedding band broke, which my mom took as a sign of bad luck. 2 weeks later, she gave birth to a stillborn baby girl. Doctors could give no explanation for the baby's death. Everything had seemed to go right. Everything was normal right up till the birth. The tragic outcome baffled the medical experts of that day. My mom and dad named their deceased daughter Cheryl Gay. I can only imagine the heartache that my parents experienced after losing their baby girl. On the rare occasion that my mom spoke of her, she would say that the baby looked perfect, as though nothing was wrong with her. They buried Cheryl in the Fort Cobb Cemetery in Oklahoma. Instead of celebrating their joy, they mourned the loss of their firstborn child. The gifts she received at her baby shower, receiving blankets, knitted sweaters, booties, infant sleep sets, all served as a reminder of her loss and what was not meant to be. About a year later, my mom learned that she was expecting again. Incredulously, a couple weeks prior to her due date, her wedding band broke again. This panicked my mom, but logic told her that it couldn't be a sign that something was wrong with her baby. God wouldn't do that to her again, right? Then on September 16th, 1945, my mom gave birth to another full term, stillborn baby girl. Losing their second baby stunned my mom and dad, leaving them brokenhearted and profoundly devastated. As before, there was no reasonable explanation, and doctors shook their head in baffled confusion. Mom and dad named their second baby girl Nikki Pamela, and they buried her next to her older sister in the Fort Cobb Cemetery. A few months later, my dad bought my mom a new wedding band. My first memory about Cheryl Gay and Nikki Pamela is imprinted in my mind forever. I was 5 years old, and our family had driven back to Fort Cobb to spend Thanksgiving with my dad's family. While we were there, we visited the cemetery. I listened as my mom explained to my brother Morgan that he had two older sisters. And I remember feeling jealous because Morgan had two sisters and I didn't. Later, my mom explained to me that she didn't tell me about the girls because she thought I was still too young to understand. But she assured me that Cheryl and Nikki were my sisters as well. Well, when we arrived at the cemetery, my mom got out of the car to go visit the graves. My dad stayed in the car with us children. I remember my mom crying because the grounds caretaker had mowed over the plastic flower bouquets that my mom had left on her baby's graves. I watched my mom crawling on her hands and knees, picking up tiny fragments of flowers and attempting to form them into some kind of makeshift bouquet. Seeing my mom so desperate and so sad deeply pained my little girl heart. I didn't understand loss at that young age, but I somehow perceived her pain and the ache in her heart. It left a lasting impression on me that remains even to this day. About 20 years ago, Ron and I visited Oklahoma to see his relatives who are also from there. And we made it a point to drive through Fort Cobb, Oklahoma. I had one hope in mind that I could put flowers on Cheryl and Nikki's graves and take pictures to give to my mom. So we made it a point to stop by the local florist and we purchased some beautiful large silk bouquet of red roses, which were my mom's favorite. And we laid them on the babies' graves and took pictures. Knowing my parents were not religious, I often wondered how it was that they coped with the devastating loss of their babies. Without fail, they would reply that they knew in their hearts that God didn't take their babies from them without a reason. He wouldn't do that unless he had a special plan for them. Their trust in God's plan gave them the courage to carry on during those discouraging, dark days. One morning, while I was taking a walk, a vision came into my mind. I pictured my mom and dad in their indescribable grief, mourning the death of their babies. In particular, I could picture my mom lying in her hospital bed, overcome by such profound feelings of loss. In my mind's eye, I pictured me and my four children in our premortal states, kneeling around her, crying with her, and whispering words of encouragement and hope. I imagined us telling her to hold on, to not lose faith. And we reassured her that she would have the family she longed for someday. That we were there, I am certain. Who else would God send to comfort my mom and dad in their grief but those who would become their future family? Perhaps even my two brothers and their families surrounded that hospital bed as well. I don't know. But if I had the talent, I would paint a picture of this scene. And how moving would that be? Okay, well, evidently, I am not going to make it through this without being a blubbering mess. So I hope that you will hang in there with me. Okay. In the early 1950s, my mom and dad loaded up their belongings and moved to California. Most of my mom's family had previously made this move and they had settled in Southern California. My mom and dad, however, wanted to settle in an area farther north. So, after living in San Bernardino for a few weeks, they began the drive up Highway 101, but they never made it past Santa Barbara. The historical Refugio fire of 1955 caused all roads in the area to close. Frustrated and finding no alternative route north, my mom and dad returned to San Bernardino. A few days later, my father answered a help wanted ad and applied for a job with Caltrans. Well, my mom decided if my dad got a job, then she should just try her luck. So she applied at the Security Pacific National Bank in San Bernardino. At first, personnel told her that they had no positions, but a wise VP told them to call her back as soon as possible, and he offered her a job as the head bookkeeper. A few months later, abandoning their original plan to move north, my mom and dad purchased a home in Rialto. When I think of that tragic refugio fire that destroyed nearly 80,000 acres near Santa Barbara, I can't help but feel grateful. I know that sounds terrible, but I can't help it because if not for that fire, I would not be who I am today. And I mean that quite literally. After 15 years of not being able to conceive a child, another child of their own, my mom and dad made a decision to adopt. In the spring of 1960, they received word that they could pick up their newborn baby boy. My mom was upstairs at the bank when one of the ladies in bookkeeping informed her that she had a call from the adoption agency. My mom always told me that she was wearing 4-inch spike heeled pumps at the time, but she ran down those stairs, taking them two at a time. She turned down a promotion as assistant vice president because she knew once she had a child, she wanted to be home. And that's what she did. About a year and a half later, she received another phone call, this time letting her know that a baby girl, that would be me, had been put up for adoption. The adoption agency told my parents that they could come and see me before deciding if they wanted me. But they told the social worker that they didn't want to come and see me. They wanted to bring me home. And that's what they did. For my mom and dad, life was finally perfect. Their dream of having a family of their own was finally complete. At least that's what they thought. But after all those years and failed attempts to conceive a child, my mom did conceive and gave birth via cesarean section to a healthy baby boy. And so, 18 years after bearing their second daughter, my mom and dad had 3 children in 3 years, and they couldn't be happier, except for the fear that existed in the back of my mother's mind. Fear that someone would come and take away one of their adopted children. This fear intensified when open adoption became popular. Ours was a closed adoption. That's the way my parents wanted it. And it was the assurance the adoption agency gave them. My mom told me a number of times that when she would put us down for naps, she would sit in the living room to guard the front and back doors. She couldn't close her bedroom door at night because she wanted to hear if anyone tried to sneak in during the night to steal one of her babies. Although she knew her fears were irrational, for her, they were very real. I imagine those fears had roots in knowing firsthand what it felt like to lose a child twice. That likely accounts for why I felt so angry when my birth mother found me in 1993. I was 32 years old and I received a certified letter with an unfamiliar return address. When I opened the letter, two photos fell into my lap. I cannot explain my initial reaction other than to say that I was staring into the face of three ghosts. All my life, I looked through family photo albums and never expected to look like anyone. But suddenly I was looking into the faces of three women, all who bore a resemblance to me. I would later learn that one of these ladies was my birth mother, and the other two were my biological aunts. Up to this point in my life, I had often wondered about the woman who gave birth to me. I even fantasized about finding her someday and letting her know that she had done the right thing, that I was a happy child and that I was loved. And in my mind, my birth mother was a young girl who got pregnant and had no way to care for a baby. Sometimes I would worry about her, thinking that she must have suffered immense guilt, fretting over whether she had made the right decision. Turns out my birth mother wasn't young and helpless with nowhere to turn for help. She was a woman in her mid 20s, and I was not the first baby that she gave up for adoption. So, somewhere in this world, I have his half sister who's 2 years older than me. When my birth mother contacted me, I experienced simultaneous emotions of anger, resentment, and gratitude. I felt grateful that she gave me up for adoption because wonderful parents raised me. At the same time, I felt anger and resentment towards her for not wanting me enough to keep me. Another reason I felt angry was because I knew my mom was hurting. This was her worst fear come to pass. And I felt this overwhelming need to protect her and to reassure her that she was my real mother. Although my plan was to someday search for my birth mother, I wasn't prepared for it when it happened the other way around. I wasn't ready for the unexpected intrusion, and I admit that it added to some of the resentment that I experienced. I tried very hard to be gracious and grateful. For the majority of my life, I struggled with rejection anxiety and fear of abandonment, an unhealthy fear of abandonment. And I never understood why or where it came from. It made no sense. My upbringing was filled with people who loved and cared for me and who would never abandon me. So, why the anxiety and fear of rejection? So, after hearing from my birth mother and learning about her backstory, I learned that there was a 6 week hole in my life between my birth and my adoption. And what happened during those early weeks of my life will likely remain a mystery forever. I developed a comfort stem of like sucking my tongue and rubbing my fingers, hands, legs, or feet together in repetitive and constant movements. Through research and study, I've learned that these types of stems are ways of self soothing. The constant movement comes from the need for human touch and is deeply seated in the need for babies to feel connected to their new environment by experiencing skin to skin contact. Given what science has taught us over the past several decades, the likelihood that those stems originated during my early weeks of life, it seems reasonable. Back in the 60s, when I was born, babies were not swaddled. They were the way they are today. And the experts of the day did not advocate for holding babies. They asserted that holding infants would spoil them. How grateful I am that we know better now, right? Well, here's a sweetly beautiful thought that my daughter shared with me after I told her about this 6 week void in my life. She said that she likes to think that she was with me during those 6 weeks, that she stayed by my side to provide comfort and companionship. The thought of this just brings my heart so much joy because as soon as she said it, that visual implanted in my brain. And it's a pretty powerful image for me to hold on to. And it makes me feel so loved. My mom used to tell me that I was special because my birth mother loved me so much that she put me up for adoption. But that reasoning never made sense to me. In my brain, giving me up translated to someone can love you, but it doesn't mean they want you in their life. Sadly, my brain applied this rationale to God. He could love me, but it didn't mean that he wanted me with him. And it took me years to learn how to trust Heavenly Father's love for me and to trust that He desired for me to be with Him. Well, fast forward to today. Now my mom lives in heaven and is joined by my dad, her sweetheart. If not for the power of my parents' love, I honestly don't know how I would have survived and overcome the conflicting emotions I experienced knowing I was adopted. Surprisingly, the conflict had nothing to do with feeling like I wasn't my parents' real daughter. No, my mom and dad could not have possibly loved me more if I shared their DNA. Had I not been raised by my sweet parents, I never would have been able to move past the stigma of being an unwanted child. No two parents could have loved me more or wanted me more, and how very grateful I am for the divine design that brought us together. On December 26, 2017, my daughter Rachel and her husband Devin knelt across the altar of the temple as proxies for my mom and dad. My Christmas gift to my parents that year was to make their 72-year civil marriage an eternal one. Now, I've shared this experience before, so I'm not going to go into the details right now. But moments later, I knelt at that same altar and became my mom and dad's real daughter for all eternity. And I cannot express in words what that moment meant to me and the joy that I experienced in knowing that I truly belong to them forever. And at that moment, decades of doubt and insecurity vanished, and they were replaced with confidence and peace. It is abundantly clear to me that the divine design that brought our family together did not begin with the refugio fire that caused my parents to drive back to San Bernardino. Had my two older sisters lived, my parents would never have left Oklahoma and they never would have adopted my brother or me. Our family would not exist. And this is a mind boggling thought for me. We're not here by accident, and our lives are not merely left to chance. When we embrace the reality of our premortal existence and the eternal truth that our souls are eternal, it becomes profoundly clear that there is a plan, a grand plan for this earth, and an infinite and intimate plan for each one of us individually. My mother's love for her family truly is the closest thing to godly love one could experience during this mortal life. I may have doubted this at difficult times throughout my childhood, but I know now with unshakable certainty how much my parents loved me. And I feel that kind of love for my own children and my grandchildren. No greater love exists on this earth than the love of a mother. And I thank God every day for mine and for the blessing of being a mother and a grandmother to my children and grandchildren. I love them with a love that is so profoundly powerful that it consumes me at times. For most of my life, I wanted nothing more than to become the mother that my mom was, and then later, the kind of grandmother she was. It's not that I didn't want a career. I just didn't want a career more than I wanted to be a mom. I dreamed of the day that I could quit my job and be home with my children full time. I was able to realize that dream for the short span of 6 years. I treasure those years in ways words could never convey. About 18 months after my third child was born, my son Taylor, I was forced to go back to work in order for us to be able to pay our bills. And a couple years later, when I found out I was pregnant with Ellen, I made the decision that I would stay home, whatever the cost. That's about the time when my children's father decided that he was going to become a millionaire by building an Amway business. So instead of working harder at his job or getting a second job, he gave less time to his paid job and focused instead on what in reality was little more than a pipe dream. By the time Ellen was 18 months old, we had lost our home in a foreclosure and we were going through a divorce. And definitely that is not a story I'm going to get into today. But as a result, the dream that I had of being an at home mom, of being there for my children, of being for my own children, all that my mom was for me, had died. I remember very clearly the moment when I was sitting in our little HUD repo brown house with brown carpet and brown tile and pukey peach cabinets. And I felt the words, if you want a different life, one with security, you're going to have to build it yourself. Up until this point, my children had my full attention all the time. I volunteered at their school. I met them at the bus stop each day. I joined a family home evening group where we planned these amazing family home evening lessons each week for our families. And since my parents had moved up to the desert to be near us, we visited grandma and grandpa all the time. But once the decision to divorce was made, everything changed. I could no longer be the at home mom I dreamed of being. I would have to go back to work in order to provide for myself and my children. And so, well over 20 years ago, I chose a career where I would at least be on the same schedule as my kids, and I became a school teacher. Now, you all know that I went through a crisis of faith following my divorce, so no new revelations here. And that spiritual struggle lasted for a few years. And I know when people are hurting, they make mistakes and they do things that they would never otherwise do. I was no exception to this. I regret the period of time where I was emotionally and spiritually not fully there for my kids, for those times when I was there, but I was not there. The reasons don't really matter. I was existing in survival mode. The pain and guilt and loneliness of divorce created within me an intense sense of failure. And well, people don't always make great choices when they're broken. Fortunately, my mom and my dad became our saving grace. They gave my children the sense of security that they were missing from both me and their father. My mom and dad provided a solid sense of safety when I could not. And how very grateful I am for them, and how blessed we were to have them less than a mile away. And though I tried to make up for those lost years with my children, and though they understand and they know how much I love them, the reality is they still deal with some of the residual effects of those lost years. So now I want to talk about the mother blessed. My mom was the mother blessed. Although for the first 20 years of her marriage, she did not feel that. It wasn't until after the tragedies and after the long years of waiting that those blessings came. And every day she counted herself blessed because of her family. Today, I am a mother blessed. I have a relationship with my children that means the world to me. I would do anything for them, and I know they love me. They loved me when I was broken, and they love me now when I am whole. I am blessed because I know that even though I can never go back and undo the damage caused by my mistakes and the mistakes of their father, I know that the Savior can. I know that through the power of his atonement, Jesus can heal every hurt my ex husband and I caused our children. My children will make their own mistakes with their children, and Jesus, he can heal those hurts too. In many ways, I am a lot like my mom. Sometimes I laugh when I see her in me, but I'm not her. No matter how much I wanted to be, my path was a different one. I ended up being the mom with a career, the career I never wanted, but a career that allowed me to provide for my kids, to give them the security of always having a roof over their head and food in their pantry. A career that today allows me to spoil my grandchildren just a little bit in ways that I was never able to spoil my own kids. When my mom passed away, I was vacationing in Hawaii with Ron and my two daughters, Rachel and Ellen. They were with me when the phone call came. Together, we mourned her loss and talked about our memories of her and what a blessing she was to our family. Having my daughters with me gave me comfort, and it helped the sting of death feel a little less painful. But I was also grateful that my daughters had me there to comfort them because they had lost their beloved grandma. On this day, when we honor mothers, I honor mine. Praise be to God for the blessing of my mother. And I honor the sacred calling of motherhood. I love the relationship that I have with my children and my grandchildren, and I treasure those relationships with all my heart. I know a name, a glorious name, sweeter than any other. Listen, I'll whisper that name to you. It is the name of Mother. The last time I saw my mom, I hugged her and told her I loved her. While I was gathering my things to walk out the door, I heard her call my name. When I turned around, she had gotten out of her chair and was walking toward me, clutching her walker. I looked at her. What? I said, and she smiled and said, I love you. I thought it was strange because we had said, I love you to each other just a moment earlier. But I walked over to her. I gave her a hug and kissed her on the cheek. I love you too, Mom, I said. And those were the last words we said to each other. And still, it didn't feel like it was enough. This week, let us not only honor our mothers for giving us the gift of life, but for those of you for whom it is not too late to do so, please tell your mom how much you love her and tell her why you love her. She needs to know what part of being a mom she managed to get right. And then remember to tell her often, not just every second Sunday in May. Happy Mother's Day to you. Whether you're a mom, a grandma, an aunt, a sister, a friend, or someone who will become a mother someday, either in this life or the next. And Mom, happy Mother's Day to you in heaven. I miss you every day, and I love you. Thanks for listening and for sharing this moment with me as I pay tribute to my mom and to the blessing that being a mother is to me. Have a great week, everyone. Until next time.